Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Ecology of Eagles virtual event. My name is Tanya Mickelson, and I'm the events manager at Columbia Land Trust. I'd like to first acknowledge the resiliency of Indigenous peoples and that no matter where you're tuning in from today, you are on native land. Before I introduce our program, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items so you know how to participate in today's event. At any time during the webinar, you'll have the opportunity to submit your questions to today's presenters using the chat feature or the Q&A box, both found on your Zoom control panel. As time allows, the presenters will address as many questions as we can during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. We will be recording this webinar and share the link out after the event. Getting us started today is Columbia Land Trust Forest Conservation Director, Cherie Carney. Cherie is one of the Land Trust's first employees and has spent her career protecting and conserving our region's forest habitat. Welcome, Cherie.
Hi, everyone. I am so happy to be joining you today. Let's see, looks like. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be joining you today. Well, welcome to Columbia Land Trust. I just want to give you a little bit of an overview before we introduce our guest speaker. Columbia Land Trust, our mission is to conserve and care for land and water and wildlife of the Columbia River region. And we do this through science and strong relationships. This is really the core of who we are, and it really extends throughout all of our staff and our work. Here's the region we serve. It's a little bit maybe hard to put it in perspective, but this shows you the lower 250 miles of the Columbia River, and about 50 miles going into Washington and 50 miles going into Oregon. It's 5 distinct ecoregions, each one of them very different. Our work starts on the east end in the Columbia Plateau, where the John Day River in Oregon runs into the Columbia, and it extends through the metropolitan area of Portland and Vancouver. It goes down all the way to the ocean, starting, when you think about it, starting in the Columbia Plateau, where the rainfall is about 9 inches annually, and ending up down at the coast, where it's as high as 120 inches, where there's Sitka spruce old growth coming from shrub steppes. So it really is a diverse area. The mustard colored areas you see are the highest conservation areas for Columbia Land Trust. And the yellow are areas we've conserved, more than 50,000 acres. We're going to go to one of our conservation areas down on the Grays River. This is about 30 miles from the ocean, where the Grays River runs into the Columbia. And this is a cold winter morning when the smelt are running. Our stewardship staff, Austin, and his dog Porter, are just at the mouth of the river. So pay attention as Tanya plays this, and you're going to start to see eagles in the trees. If you look on the left, you might see a few eagles. I think we're waiting to queue up here. There we go. Okay, so here we go. There's more eagles and more. If you look closely in those bare trees, they're hanging there, they're in the sky. There's more and more. This morning that Austin was out on this protected site, he saw more than 100 eagles. So that's just one example of what we're trying to contribute for wildlife habitat. There they all are. You can see them in the sky. For many years, I've led a tour this time of year where we've taken people out through the gorge into the Klickitat River to experience eagles and winter waterfowl and hear from tribal perspectives about the Columbia River region. And we do that because foundationally, we believe that if you know nature, you'll love it. And if you know wildlife, you'll care for them and appreciate them. Today, we're not going there, but I am thrilled to bring you Frank Isaacs, who is really the most renowned eagle expert that we have here in the Northwest. A little bit about Frank. He came to us from the Upper Peninsula over 31 years ago. He has degrees in forestry and forest wildlife management, but for 31 years, Frank's been leading bald eagle research for Oregon State University. He's worked in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Alaska on eagle research, just to give you a flavor for what an impact he's had. Frank has received the Dave Simmons Award for Vision from the Oregon Natural Resources Council for the Oregon Eagle Foundation. Frank has received the Oregon Wildlife Achievement Award from the Wildlife Society for leadership in bald eagle protection. He's received the Outstanding Research Assistant Award from Oregon State University for science, academic, and community affairs on behalf of eagles. Frank's received the Oregon Wildlife Society Award for wildlife conservation for eagles, and the Order of the Eagle Award from Eagle Watch for his partnership for eagles. He's currently finishing up 10 years of golden eagle research, which he's putting into a report. He's just in the final stages of that. And Frank lives in Wren, Oregon, with his spouse, Jane Olson, their dog, ducks, and sheep. Welcome, Frank.
Thank you, Tanya and Cherie. Thanks for the nice introduction. I have been very lucky to end up doing what I've got to do over the years. I was actually born in Indiana and went to spent a lot of time in my youth in Upper Michigan and sort of adopted the area. I ended up going to college at Michigan Tech where I got a forestry degree, believe it or not, and that kind of morphed into more of an interest in wildlife and birds. And I was lucky enough to do a master's degree on peregrine falcons in the upper peninsula of Michigan, which got me into raptor research. As a lot of foresters do, I kind of migrated to Oregon in 77 and 78 to try to find work, and was lucky enough to find a 6-month job working on a bald eagle project out of Oregon State University in 1979. And it became pretty apparent at the end of that 6-month period that there was a lot more to be done. The state is a huge area to cover. We were trying to monitor all the bald eagle nests in the state of Oregon, and it was just a much bigger project than you could do in a 1-year study. So we showed the value of having bald eagle nest monitoring. Bald eagles were on the endangered species at that time, the endangered species list at that time, and all the agencies needed to know where the nests were in order to protect those nests. So our mission for the next 30 years at Oregon State was to monitor the bald eagle nesting areas in the state every year and track the population as it changed through time. Since that, I got the opportunity to work on golden eagles starting in 2011. We've done a 10-year study on golden eagles in Oregon with sort of the same goals, and that's to figure out how many nesting pairs we had and also determine where those nests are at and how many young they raise each year. So basically, I've spent a lot of time watching eagles, and I feel very fortunate to have been able to do that. Next slide, please. Several things I want to point out with this slide is that one, it has taken a lot of people, a lot of agencies, a lot of energy to pull these studies off. They're both long-term studies. In the wildlife world, if you do something more than 2 years, it's sort of a long-term study. But we were able to follow the bald eagle population for 30 years from when they were put on the endangered species list until they were removed in 2007. And for golden eagles, the first year was thought to be a pilot year, and we were able to continue for 10 years because it really takes that long to learn about these birds. So I want to thank the funders, all the people who participated. I couldn't even begin to list everybody who's participated in this time slot. There's been hundreds of people. My annual reports on both the Bald Eagle Project and the Golden Eagle Project list everyone that contributed funding and participated either as a volunteer or as a cooperator. And I just have to thank all of those folks for that. And unfortunately, Bernie forgot his binoculars this day, so we had to help him out. I wanted to say for on that last slide that binoculars and spotting scopes are, along with a field notebook and a pencil, are the main tools that we use. So let's move on to eagles. What is an eagle? What's the ecology of eagles? Ecology of eagles is a huge topic that could take years to cover thoroughly. Eagles are well-studied species. And the eagle, the word eagle is really kind of a generic word for a large bird of prey. And there are different kinds of eagles. There are 4 different groups. We have 2 kinds of eagles in Oregon and Washington along the Columbia River. We have the bald eagle, which is one of the sea eagles, and we have the golden eagle, which is a true or booted eagle. So our 2 eagles kind of fit into there in that way. Eagles range in size from 3 to 8 foot wingspan and 1 to 20 pounds in size, and occur in all continents except Antarctica and in most habitats in the world. Just for contrast with our eagles, here's a picture of the Harpy Eagle, which is the largest eagle in the world. It can be weigh as much as 20 pounds. It's a forest bird of Central and South America. And then in Australia, the smallest bird with the title eagle is the little eagle, aptly named, which lives in open habitats, hunts rodents and even insects, and can be as small as 1 pound. Now that brings us to our eagles that live in the Pacific Northwest, and you might see along the Columbia River. The bald eagle, obviously the white head and tail, our national bird. Its scientific name literally means sea eagle white-headed. We call it the bald eagle because bald was an Old English term for white. And that's how it got its name. The golden eagle, its scientific name literally means eagle, golden, and it's named for the golden hackles on the back of its head. Now, the 2 species are very different. As I pointed out in the earlier slide, there's a lot of variation in birds called eagles, and these 2 birds came from very different lines of evolution. The bald eagle is more of a water-based bird. It's called a sea eagle or a fish eagle, and it tends to nest near water and tends to prey on fish. Golden eagles are more apt to live in open country, live on jackrabbits and rodents, and to not eat fish very often. Once in a while they do. There is a lot of overlap with these 2 species in their habits and habitats. However, they can be divided up, and it's when you're out in the field, it's nice to be able to distinguish the 2. And there are times when that's hard to do. And so in my talk, instead of trying to talk about the ecology of eagles, I just wanted to try to give you clues on how to identify and age eagles, focus mainly on bald eagles, and also point out kind of why eagles are in this area and when they're here, and then talk a little bit about the human interactions. Next slide. The adult bald eagle and adult golden eagle are pretty easy to tell apart. You know, adult bald eagles have the iconic white head and tail, and adult golden eagles have the golden hackles and our brown bodies with no distinct white. The problem comes, let's go to the next slide. The problem comes when you're trying to identify young eagles in the field and distinguish those from adult golden eagles, because they are basically large brown birds. And if you were to write down the identifying characteristics, it'd be hard to know exactly what you were looking at. Bald eagles both species take about 5 years to get their adult plumage. And for bald eagles, fortunately, the change that they go through can be seen in their head feathers. And that's good because you can usually see the head of a bald eagle. With golden eagles, the change is generally in the tail, and that's hard to see. And a golden eagle goes from having a broad white band in its tail to having an all dark brown tail. The wing spots you see in the juvenile golden eagle here in flight, those bright white wing spots, may or may not be present. On the bald eagle, young bald eagle, you see mottling on the body, which is very different than the bright white spots on the golden eagle. However, in the field, they're hard to tell apart. It's especially hard to tell a young bald eagle from an adult golden eagle. The one thing I want you to look at as we go through here is head and beak size. Bald eagles have bigger heads and beaks than golden eagles in relation to the rest of their body size. Now, there's been quite a bit of effort in learning on how to age bald eagles in the field. This slide shows different ages of bald eagles. They're all different birds. These pictures were, this was put together by the Illinois Raptor Center. And there's a little rule of thumb you might use when you're out in the field looking at eagles. If you know it's a bald eagle and it's all dark, that's a first-year bird. It hatched the last nesting season and is not a year old yet. If the bird has mottling, it's getting some white on its head, but its head is mostly dark, and but with some white markings starting to show up. It's probably a 2-year-old, so that would be a second-year bird, as opposed to the third-year bird, which head is starting to look light, but still has a lot of dark feathering. So, and the second-year bird, the head looks darker than light. The third-year bird, the head looks lighter than dark. And then in year 4, the year before they get their adult plumage, they still can have some dirty feathers in their head plumage. And then they get their white head and tail at year 5. Now, there is variation in this, and sometimes it's not as clear cut as it sounds. Next picture. Now, this was one individual bird. This was a bald eagle that was injured and could not be released just early in its life, just after fledging, I believe, and it was placed in the Shintimony Wildlife Rehab Center here in Corvallis, Oregon. And a local 3rd grade class adopted it, named it Sparky. It was a male, and put out a little booklet about Sparky. And in that book, they have pictures of it at 1-year intervals. You see here on the left, and you can see it went from being a dark head to a mostly dark head with darker feathers, and then the light head with some dark feathers, the near adult, and then back to the adult stage. So there is a lot of variation here. And next slide. This has also been studied scientifically in Maine. Years ago, they marked a bunch of young eagles and put out feeding stations with deer carcasses and such, and had the eagles marked so they could be identified at a distance with colored leg bands. And they were able to follow those eagles as they developed through several years until they became adults. And this is kind of a composite of a lot of different eagles showing the same basic characteristics, going from the dark head to the mostly dark head with some white to mostly white head with some dark. and the dirty head and the adult plumage. So when you're out looking at eagles, with bald eagles, you can use some of these clues to try to determine what their age is. Next slide. Here's a nice picture showing the contrast between an adult bald eagle and its 3 big old dark young. This nest was at Wallowa Lake, but you see the same thing along the Columbia River, lots of nests in cottonwood trees. And in the summer during nesting season, you see the young on the nest and the adults perched nearby. Next slide. Interestingly enough, there's one stage in the bald eagles or in the golden eagles nesting cycle when they raise young that the young have a mostly white head and a dark body. And it was interesting at this particular nest because I was in Eastern Oregon near a ranch and I was looking at it, and the rancher stopped and wanted to see. And I said, yeah, there's a nest over there with a couple of bald eagle or golden eagle chicks in it. And he looked in there and he goes, those are bald eagles. So it's just interesting what you run into when you're out there. These birds over the next 2 weeks will get dark feathers in their heads and look like typical golden eagle young. Another example of some different bald eagle plumages, and also a chance to point out that bald eagles are more gregarious than golden eagles, especially in the winter and when they're not adults yet. They don't have breeding territories. They'll gather where food is abundant and they'll perch together. And at night, they'll go to places called communal roosts where many will roost together in the same place. Next slide. Here's a little quiz. We'll go through these just to see what we've learned here. Let's go clockwise. So upper left is a bird, and it's in a position like a chicken on a nest. And you don't see eagles in that position very often, except for on nests. And so this is a big brown bird on a nest. So it's either a young before fledging, or it's an adult on a nest in incubating or brooding position. And because its feathers are faded, that's a good clue that it's an adult. It's not a young bird whose feathers would be all dark. And so that's an adult golden eagle on a nest in the upper left. To the right, another dark brown bird with a brown eye but no golden hackles. Now, if that was a golden eagle and all dark feathers, it would have golden hackles on the back of its head. Also, note how big the beak and head are. So that's a newly fledged bald eagle that was just probably just left the nest within a couple days. Below that, lower right, is a bird with golden hackles, bright white wing patches, as you can barely see, a white tail patch you can barely see. And one characteristic, which it's hard to see, but it's the difference between bald and golden eagles that you might want to know, is that the legs on a golden eagle are feathered down to the toes. And those feathers can be light colored, so they don't stand out. But there are feathers going down the leg all the way down to its toes. A bald eagle's lower leg in that area is not feathered. It's an interesting thing. It's not often that you get to see that, but the golden hackles on that bird, the smaller head and feathered toes and white markings show that as a subadult golden eagle. And then lower left is a bald eagle because of the way the head is, the size of the head basically makes that obvious. You might mistake some of the lighter markings on this bald eagle for the hackles of a golden eagle, but the head size and beak size are very large. And a adult golden eagle in that position would really show a much smaller head like that bird to the right. Next slide, please. And just put the names on these so you can take a quick look at them and maybe remember some of those clues. Eagles are big, but when you're out in the field, you see them everything from, you know, a tiny dot 2 miles away through a spotting scope to an enormous bird in a spotting scope in a tree nearby where you can just see the head in the spotting scope. So they're large birds, but it's kind of hard to get an idea of what their size is, their true size. And so I've got a series of slides here of eagles with other species. There's a subadult bald eagle. That was a subadult bald eagle with a red-winged blackbird. That's okay. Next slide. Here is a peregrine falcon dive bombing an adult bald eagle. Get an idea of the size there. That's something that probably happens every day in the Columbia River Gorge because there are a lot of peregrines nesting in the gorge, as well as bald eagles. Here's a relatively rare event in Oregon. This is a subadult bald eagle on the left with a gyrfalcon attacking it. Now, gyrfalcons nest north of us, but do show up in the winter in Washington and Oregon and do interact with bald eagles. Next. One bird that you'll see just about every time you go out looking for eagles will be the raven. And that's the black bird in this picture. This raven is chasing a golden eagle. That's something I see a lot. And I think ravens have a special word for golden eagles because if you hear a raven doing a certain call and flying hard in a straight line and look ahead of it, it's probably chasing a golden eagle. They don't like them. They chase them away from their nest. And I don't know what the word is or know how to translate it, but I'm sure they have a word for it. Next slide. Another bird you'll see a lot of in the Columbia Gorge, especially in the summer, is the osprey. And here's an example of an osprey compared to an eagle. Osprey in the front, they have white breast and belly and underwing coverts. They have a dark stripe in their head. Sometimes when they're perched, they can be confused with a young bald eagle, but a bald eagle always has a dark body. This is one of those near adult bald eagles with a dirty looking head and tail. And they're about the same size. Now, one bird that makes the others look small is the California condor in the lower right. They used to nest in the gorge according to anecdotal evidence. And maybe someday again, we'll get to see something like this with bald eagles and condors in the same field of view. Now, why is Oregon and especially the lower Columbia River such an important and well-used place by eagles? Well, this colorful area that's circled on this map of the globe is Oregon. That's all my pins from bald eagles and golden eagles and all that outlining the state. The 45th parallel runs through northern Oregon, just south of the lower Columbia River. What that means is you're halfway between the equator and North Pole. I'm sure you see these signs. If you're driving north and south through Oregon, you see this sign on several highways. And that's what that means. And an interesting thing is that eagles, both bald and golden, use the whole western side of North America as not a playground, but a habitat that they wander through when they're not at their nest sites. Next slide. Here's an example of 2 years worth of travel by a juvenile and subadult golden eagle that was radioed in Denali National Park in Alaska. That's that area of clumped observations up towards the top of the map. But that bird went all the way, traveled over a 2-year period. It went all the way from the Arctic Ocean down to East Oregon and did that twice. It came to Oregon 1 year, Washington the second year. And so that's a north-south movement with Oregon as one of the southern terminuses. Now here's a adult golden eagle that was injured in Mexico, and it was rehabbed and outfitted with a transmitter and followed, and it moved north through the western United States and ended up in northeast Oregon also. That's an example of travel north to south, south to north. Eagles from Oregon, we banded eagles in Oregon and had them end up moving north and south, visiting all of our adjacent states and going all the way to Mexico and into British Columbia over the years. So the whole western states area, it's kind of the western flyway, if you were looking at waterfowl, is eagle habitat. One of the reasons Oregon and Washington are so important to both species is they provide a lot of variety of habitats. As Cherie pointed out, the area along the Columbia River goes from shrub steppe down to the ocean with large elevation differences and large differences in climate and weather. And the food is what attracts eagles to these places. Salmon is very important food for bald eagles especially, and bald eagles like to congregate at salmon runs. And that's that's kind of the key to watching eagles on the Columbia River, is finding where the salmon are running. They also may be looking for other fish runs to attract eagles, and then other kinds of prey. Next slide, please. In Eastern Oregon, jackrabbits are a very important food to both species of eagle. Bald eagles on migration will often clean up roadkill jackrabbits. Golden eagles that tend to nest in Eastern Oregon more than Western Oregon often prey on jackrabbits. And when the jackrabbit population is high, golden eagle nesting success is much better than during lows in the jackrabbit population, because the jackrabbits are a primary food source. Next slide. For both species, especially in Eastern Oregon, the emergence of ground squirrels is a time to hunt those areas and find ground squirrels as a food source. And there's, over the last, 20 years, there's been developed actually a business around taking shooters out to shoot ground squirrels. And anymore, the eagles are attracted to that shooting. I don't really condone it. The lead can get into the bird's diet, and not good for it's not good for the birds to some extent. And in some ways it helps the birds. It's kind of a complicated situation. Next slide. Waterfowl are also an important food source. We have large migrations, especially in the spring, that come through the Harney Basin, the Klamath Basin, and bald eagles tend to follow those migrations, especially the birds that nest far north of us. And so at anywhere that you see there's a large congregation of waterfowl and some die, the eagles will eat the birds that have died, and they'll also take live birds that may not be healthy or old or just unlucky. So waterfowl are another important food for both species. Next. I mentioned earlier that bald eagles have an interesting behavior in gathering in groups, and they do what we call communal roosting. And that occurs when there's abundant food for a long period of time, because one eagle passing through an area might see other bald eagles and then go and see why they're there and find out there's plenty of food. And if that food supply lasts for days on end, then the numbers of eagles there will increase, and they got to go roost somewhere every night. And they often will fly to a isolated stand of trees. Used to be they'd go a long ways and get away from humans. Anymore they're less sensitive to human activity and will often roost where they're visible from roads or trails. And if you're out watching eagles either early in the morning or late in the evening, you might see them coming or going from a roost site. And it's interesting to try to find those roosts and watch the behaviors at those areas. Next. Here's an attempt to give you some idea of how the eagle population changes. I put this together for Oregon, but it applies to Washington and the lower Columbia River. This time of year, late January, February, is the time we have the most eagles in the state. And that's because we have our residents here are getting ready to nest. And we also have a lot of non-residents that have not yet left to go to their nesting areas. Over the next few months, our nesters will become the main population as the residents, or as the non-residents and migrants leave to go back to their nesting areas. We end up with our resident birds. Over the spring, they raise young, and so the peak of the resident birds is right after fledging of the young, because for every nesting pair, they produce just about one young. So if we have 500 nesting pairs in Oregon, right at the end of the nesting season, there's on average another 500 eagles suddenly joining that population. Now, as we go through the summer and into the fall, a lot of those new fledglings won't survive, unfortunately, and a lot of them wander off into other states. And so our populations will drop a little bit in the fall as birds wander out of Oregon. But then late fall or late summer and fall, the population will gradually start increasing again as the residents return and the non-resident migrants start showing up again. And so we end up again in January and February when the most eagles are here. So it's an annual cycle that's interesting to follow. Quick shot of that same area Cherie talked about. It's a really important habitat for eagles, especially bald eagles. There are a few nesting pairs of golden eagles at the upper end of the gorge in the shrub steppe. But once you get down into the forested areas, it's almost exclusively bald eagles. An amazing thing to me, because I got to watch this happen, is that in 1978, when we started, or when the bald eagle nesting study started, there were 10 known nesting sites on the lower Columbia River, and there were 5 nesting pairs. And then over the next 30 years, as we continued surveys and continued looking, it was obvious that the eagle population was increasing, and it more than doubled every 10 years to where we had about 150 nesting pairs when we ended in 2007. So that the growth of the population has been phenomenal. It really pointed out that food and nesting habitat were not the limiting factors in the bald eagle population, and that now if you go out this picture actually shows deaths through 2010, so it's been 10 years since this was updated, and if they continued doubling every 10 years, we could have twice as many pins on this map now as we had then. So whenever you're out there, just about anywhere you stop along the Columbia River to take in the view, if you have binoculars and scan the shorelines, you have a good chance of seeing an adult bald eagle because their white heads stand out. Next. So the last thing I kind of want to end with here is the thought that when you're out there watching eagles, they're watching you. You're interacting with them in their habitat. They're behaving to some extent as a result of your activities. And think about this, think about that you're watching them, watch you watch them. So it's not like being on television and watching birds do their thing and where you're not part of their life. But when you're out traveling through the gorge or looking for eagles, they are part of the same world you're in. This next series of 6 slides it was interesting because this eagle's the first one we've had come and perch above our house. I've lived west of Corvallis now, in the Wren area for 15 years, and this year for the first time we had a bald eagle come perching above our house. And we were out in the garden, my wife and I were in the garden, and this bird perched in a big tree just above us who was watching us. And these series of slides I took while the bird watched my wife Jane walk into the house, and he just, with a little yawn and a wink, watched her go in the house. So thanks a lot. Hopefully you all get to see an eagle like this, and I'll try to answer some questions if we have some.
Great. Thank you so much, Frank. That was wonderful. We do have several questions, so I'll just start reading some off here. One question that we have is in regards to the eagles maturing, when they do start to change colors, is that because they are losing feathers, or do the feather colors actually change?
Most birds go through an annual molt where they change feathers. And they do change feathers, and the new feathers that come in are different colors, are marked differently. So it is, the color change is a change in feathers. Some of the fading that you see on their backs is because of just sunlight fading feathers as they get older. But the change to white head and tail is a change in feather color.
Great, thank you. Cherie, I was wondering if you could point out a couple of spots, possibly within the Columbia River region, that are publicly accessible that folks can go for some good eagle viewing.
Yeah, one wonderful spot is down just outside of Astoria, Oregon, on the Oregon side, is the Eagle Sanctuary that Columbia Land Trust conserved with the North Coast Land Conservancy. Frank Isaacs helped with that. I think, Frank, it's just about 12 or so miles before you arrive in Astoria on the Columbia River. You can pull off. There's a viewing platform. That's a wonderful place to see eagles. And then another place in the Columbia Gorge is at the mouth of the Klickitat River, Balfour Park. And it's just off of Highway 14. And if you walk the short distance down to the river at Balfour Park, at this time of year, you will see several, at least, bald eagles feeding on salmon carcasses.
Thank you. Frank, what are the main conclusions of your 10-year study of golden eagles in Oregon?
Okay, good question. Let me back up a little bit. The bald eagle study showed that bald eagles were increasing dramatically from a low point, probably in the late 60s, early 70s. The golden eagle study, even though we found, we probably doubled the number of known golden eagle nest sites in the state, the trend in occupied nest sites and production are slightly downward. The first few years, it looked like it was pretty level and stable, but as we've added years, there's been a tendency for a decline. And a lot of that's related to a jackrabbit crash that occurred especially in southeastern Oregon. So, at first I thought the golden eagle population was at least stable, possibly increasing. Now I'm saying it's stable and possibly decreasing, and it may just be the natural fluctuation in the population. But they definitely are not increasing the way golden eagles did, or the way bald eagles did, I'm sorry.
Thank you. What are the major threats to eagles in our region today?
Well, okay, major threats today. Major threats in the past, before pesticides with bald eagles was shooting, poisoning, and trapping. Nowadays, those have been reduced quite a bit. There was a time period where pesticides were affecting the nesting abilities of eagles, but that the DDT era, that's cleared up. Now there's new chemicals coming into the system all the time. So far, they don't seem to be affecting productivity too much. So nowadays it's poaching. There's still people that shoot eagles. There's collisions with things, cars, towers, lines, and probably the most, the thing that results in the most birds being turned into rehabilitation centers nowadays is conflicts with other eagles. The population has grown to the point now where bald eagles are fighting over nest sites, and they'll injure each other, and somebody will pick up an injured eagle and go wonder what's wrong with it, and the rehabber or the vet, can find lacerations and scars from a fight with another eagle. So in the last 40 years, it's changed a lot, the threats to these birds.
Thank you. Do you have any tips when identifying eagles in the field on being able to tell the difference between male and female bald eagles?
Yeah, I meant to mention this earlier. If you just see one eagle, that's hard to do. If you see two together and they happen to be a pair, the females are always bigger than the male. And that can be quite obvious. In fact, the first slide you used for this program looked like a pair sitting on a branch, and that looked like there was a male and female there. But it's without that context, it's hard to do. If you look at a lot of eagles and you know what sex they are, and sometimes you can see a bald eagle that's obviously a female because it's big. That bird, I don't know what that is. Young bald eagle. So that's about the best I can do. Females are bigger than males. If you see two perched together, the larger one's probably a female.
Thank you. Gosh, there's so many great questions. One here is, are eagles constrained by the dramatic drop in the number of salmon we've seen in the Columbia River system over the last 70 years?
Over the last 7 or 70?
70.
70. Well, I don't know. Unfortunately, we didn't do a lot of research back then. And during that time, eagle numbers were very reduced because of people shooting, poisoning, and trapping. If you look at the anecdotal evidence of eagle populations into the 30s, or 1940, the first bird book was published for Oregon, and they had already talked about bald eagle populations being reduced by human activity, shooting, poisoning, trapping, and habitat destruction, nests being cut down. And all the way through to 1969, the next work on bald eagles that was written basically pointed out that there had been little change from the 30s to the 60s in the bald eagle population. And then the pesticide era resulted in the birds that we had. Some of the birds we had reduced productivity, which was a threat to recovery. But once the DDT thing was cleared up, shooting, poisoning, and trapping slowed because of education and interest. Bald eagles really started coming back. So the whole salmon thing that happened during that time, probably affected bald eagles to some extent, but they're so they're so adaptable in what they eat that other fish that like the dams on the Columbia River have enabled have provided other food supplies. So I don't know that they care whether they're eating a carp or a salmon, but as long as there's fish there, the bald eagles are going to be there.
Thank you. So the smaller birds who chase the eagles, when you showed some of the pictures of the peregrine falcons or the crows, Do they ever do any harm to the eagles, or is there any harm to that come to the smaller birds and kind of that competitive relationship?
Yeah, anything can happen, really. Generally, the chasing bird will stop chasing, and the eagle will fly and go do what it's going to do, and the other bird will do what it's going to do. Usually, it's protection of a nest site that causes causes the interaction. I have two examples of things that can happen. One is a bald eagle went out towards Haystack Rock off a seaside one time, and a peregrine nest out there attacked it and knocked it into the ocean. And it turns out it broke its wing, and that's why it ended up in the water. And a surfer brought it in and took it to rehab. So yes, they can be injured in those encounters. And another one story I've heard is golden eagles being harassed by a raven, and the golden eagle flipped over and grabbed the raven and took it to its nest. So it can go either way. Most of the time there is no injury either way, but it can, anything can happen.
And kind of along those lines, we have several questions regarding small pets. So is it a likely occurrence that an eagle could swoop a small dog out of your yard, or is that not something that they
I wouldn't call
do?
it likely, I'd call it possible. This eagle that's been hanging out on our yard is coming in to check out our ducks. And just yesterday, Jane was out and saw it come in and perch and check out the ducks. We keep our ducks locked up at night because of raccoons and stuff. And we have them in an orchard that basically is covered with tree branches that an eagle would have a hard time getting through. So when they're in that orchard, they're kind of protected. And we don't let them out in the open field. But the eagle still comes and checks on it. And so, again, anything can happen. There are a lot of stories of eagles carrying cats away, and a few stories of eagles getting small dogs, especially in Alaska. So I'd be careful. If you know there's eagles around and you have a small pet, I'd be careful.
So kind of along those same lines, do bald eagles tend to catch their own live food, or are they more likely to sort of scavenge and go after food that's already
Bald eagles
dead?
are remarkable in that people describe them as opportunistic scavenger predators, or predator scavengers, whichever way you want to look at it. And that's because they'll take advantage of just about any food source. In general, in the winter, they scavenge carrion when that's available, and especially the young eagles are more apt to be scavengers. But during the nesting season, generally they bring fresh live prey back to the nest, so they have to hunt during that period, or they tend to hunt more during that period. So they do both, and anymore, nothing really surprises me. They'll eat about anything any way they can get it.
Thank you. So we have a couple questions here regarding eagles' nests. So do you have any tips for identifying when you're out in the field, being able to spot an eagle's nest versus like an osprey nest?
Oh yeah, an osprey nest. Osprey nests are almost always built right on top of something, right on top of a channel marker, or right on top of a broken off tree, or right on top of a power pole. So generally they like an unobstructed approach to their nest. Whereas bald eagles, every bald eagle nest that we have seen built has been built in a tree. There's been a couple of records. There are a couple of records of them building on a power pole, or at least adding on to an old osprey nest and using a power pole. But 90% of nests, or maybe even more, are built in trees, and there are some limbs, generally some limbs above the nest, which osprey tend to avoid. I think probably one of the difficult identifiers as a large red-tailed hawk nest versus a relatively small bald eagle nest. They can look similar in a cottonwood tree, but if you have a bird there, in the context of how that nest is built in the tree, a red-tailed hawk nest can hang out on a limb a little ways and not fall. Bald eagle nests are generally much larger and are generally built next to the tree trunk or in a really strong crotch of the tree where there's big limbs holding it together. So size of the nest and size of the sticks in the nest can be a clue.
So kind of along those lines, do eagles mate for life?
Yeah, that's always a good question. Answer is sometimes. In general, it's like people. The way I try to describe it is that eagles have territories. Nesting eagles have territories, and each of the birds, the male and female, are defending their place in that territory. Their territory is the area they need to hunt to survive. They need an area big enough to hunt to supply food for themselves and their young if they're successful nesters. And so their territory is really their world, it's their home, and they defend that. Now, if one of the birds dies for some reason, the other one will get a new mate, and it will move into and be, the female or male in the territory as long as it survives. We had a couple instances where radioed eagles disappeared, but the radios continued to function. And there are records of eagles changing mates when one of them was still alive. Now, it turns out that those eagles that disappeared often had something wrong with them. And it could be just old age or an injury causes one of the pair to not be able to defend its place in the territory, and it gets run out. So again, anything can happen.
How long do bald eagles, what's their life expectancy?
Okay, they've lived to be 45 years old in zoos. The oldest wild banded bird is somewhere in the 30s. Every few years another bird is found that increases that age, but I suspect it's not unusual for an eagle to live to be 20 some years old. One of ours that we banded a long time ago ended up dying at, I think, 29 years old, was found. An interesting thing to think about is that because of their slow maturation, they're not even going to start nesting until they're probably 5 years old. And then it takes a year or two for a new adult to be part of a productive pair. So there's another couple more years there. So say 7 years old before they produce their first young. And then they have to produce enough young to replace themselves. And that's going to take 2 or 3 years of producing young. So you're almost 10 years old before you're replacing yourself in the population. And the fact that the population is growing so fast indicates that a lot of eagles are doing that. There's a lot more eagles being produced that are dying.
Thank you. So we have a question here regarding red-tailed hawks. Are those in the same family as eagles, or are they a separate group of birds?
They're a separate group of birds called hawks. They're in a group called the buteos. And if you look at raptors, you got hawks, falcons, eagles, and then the hawks, there's buteos and accipiters, which are the forest hawks, and the red-tailed fits it into the buteo group. So they are a different group.
Thank you. We have kind of interesting question here. So regarding technology in wind turbine design, is that having any impact on raptor mortality?
They're just starting to do some on the ground projects that seem to help some. One of the most notorious bird killing wind turbine projects was one of the very early wind turbine projects in California. And that was built with these small low turbines that the blades turn so fast you can't see them turn. And that one was a killer. It killed lots and lots of birds. Those turbines are being replaced gradually by the taller turbines with the blades that look like they're moving slower. They look like they're moving slower because they're so big. And that seems to have helped a lot in that area. Now there's some experimental things going on with trying to turn turbines off when a computerized sensor detects a big bird in the area. There was one guy, the project at Oregon State where they were trying to get a sensor to sense the eagle in the area and then blow up one of those things you see at used car lots, with a big waving balloon. And I don't know how that's come out, but it would be interesting to see that. Turbines still kill some birds every year. For bald eagles, it doesn't seem to be, well, it's not putting any damper on the population. It's not a real big threat. Golden eagles, on the other hand, it may be in places there may be a problem with nesting pairs that nest right near wind turbines, but I don't know the answer to that for sure.
Great, thank you. So we're coming right up on time. I think I'll just throw out one more question, and then I have recorded all of the questions that we weren't able to get to. So I will. I look forward to working with Frank and Cherie after this event to get some answers to our unanswered questions, and we'll share those out with you in the coming weeks. But for our last question today, Cherie, you mentioned some spots along the Columbia River region that are really great for bald eagles. I'm curious if either of you have recommendations where in our region we can go for golden eagle, to catch a glimpse of a golden eagle.
Well, I'm sure Frank knows, but I'll share from a Columbia Land Trust perspective. Columbia Land Trust has conserved, maybe 17,000 acres along the Klickitat River in Washington, because it is still so wild and it's good habitat, and it has canyons and it has a lot of resources. So if you travel up the Klickitat River, and then east of there, but I see golden eagles, about 10 to 15 miles up the river, and then toward the canyon as I'm traveling toward the Yakima Nation reservation. And then if I go east, anywhere east of the Klickitat River in the Rock Creek Basin and out there in the Columbia Plateau is where I see golden eagles. We have a golden eagle nest just on the border of one of Columbia Land Trust preserves up in the Klickitat.
Okay, in Oregon, we don't know of any golden eagle nests right along the river, but if you head south on any of the main highways east of Mount Hood, you get into golden eagle country. And if you scan the cliffs, and keep your eyes out for big birds, there are a lot of golden eagles just south as you get out of the Columbia River Basin. And for the life of me, I can't figure out why there aren't some golden eagles on the cliffs on the Columbia River on the Oregon side. It may be because there's so many peregrines. Just don't know for sure.
Thank you. Well, that I feel like we could really fill another hour with all of these great questions. But I do look forward to following up with you both regarding the ones we weren't able to get to today. So I just want to close this out here. Thanks again for everyone starting your Saturday morning with us to learn a little bit about Columbia Land Trust and to hear about the amazing work that Frank has done throughout his life and career in both Oregon and Washington for eagles. Work that Columbia Land Trust does to conserve habitat that is crucial for wildlife like bald or golden eagles really is made possible by people like you. If you were inspired by what you saw today, I would encourage you to consider making a gift. You can do so by visiting columbialandtrust.org/donate. I also want to let everyone know that our next virtual event will be on Saturday, February 20th, and we will be learning all about mason bees and how you can host these really effective native pollinators right in your own backyard. So you can check our website for more details and to register for that event. Thank you so much, Cherie and Frank, for lending your time and expertise today. We're so appreciative. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Frank.
you, Tanya. Thanks. Bye, Cherie.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.